In today's video, I'm going to show how to create a custom date picker. This project serves as an opportunity to understand JavaScript date manipulation and dynamic calendar creation. These are the features I will cover in the video. Toggle the date picker visibility. The date picker will show if I click on the text input and hide if I click on the cancel button. Display dynamic dates. The dates in the calendar are dynamically generated via JavaScript. Previous and next month navigation. Clicking the next button changes the dates to the next month. If it's December, the next month will be January of the next year. And for the previous button, if it's January, the previous month will be December of the previous year. Change year or month with inputs. We can navigate dates by using the month drop-down and manually setting the year. Apply or cancel date selection. Clicking the cancel button will hide the date picker, while selecting a date and clicking the apply button will update the date input. Before we begin with the tutorial, please like and subscribe. Anyway, let's dive into coding now. First, I'll make a date picker container and add a date input inside it. Just below the input, I'll make a div with date picker class. Then, I'll make a section for the days of the week. Next, I'll add a div for the dates and inside will be 30 buttons. I'll set some of the buttons to disabled. Then I'll add a today class to a random button to represent the current date. I'll also add a selected class to another button to represent the selected date. Now, I'll go to the CSS file and add some basic styles to the page first. Now I'll begin with the date picker styles. First, I'll set the date picker container to relative position. As for the date picker, I'll set it to absolute position so I can put it below the date input. It's important to set the z-index so that the date picker is not covered by other elements. For the days and dates, I will display it in a grid with 7 columns. I will set the width of each column as 32 pixels. I will add space between the buttons by setting a gap of 10 pixels. Then I'm gonna add margin on the top and bottom of both elements. I want to apply general styles for all buttons inside the date picker, so I'll put that under this selector. Next, I will add a highlight for the current date. For the selected date, I want it to stand out by highlighting it with the main color. Now, I'm done with the dates. I'll go back to HTML file to add the date picker's header and footer elements. Inside the header, I'll add 2 buttons for the previous and next navigation. Then between the buttons, I'll add a div to contain the month and year inputs. Here, I'll manually add the months. While it could be dynamically added, it's not necessary for this tutorial. For the footer, I'll add buttons for the cancel and apply action. Back to the CSS, I'll make the date picker header display to be flex. Next, I'll add padding bottom and a border bottom to separate it from the main content of the date picker. As for the dropdown and text input, I'll reduce their size to fit the header. For the date picker footer, I'll also make it display flex. Similarly to the header, I'll add padding top and a border top to create separation from the main content. Finally, for the apply button, I'll make it prominent by using the main color. Now that I've completed the layout and styles, I'll move on to covering the features in JavaScript. First, I'll hide the date picker. This should be the default behavior. Next, in the JavaScript, I'll select the date picker and the date input. Then, I'll set up an event listener on the date input, so that when it's clicked, the date picker will be displayed. Next, when either the cancel or the apply button is clicked, the date picker should be hidden. So I'll select the cancel and apply buttons to add click event listeners. For the apply button, the implementation will be partially the same. I'll add a comment for now to remind me to implement the actual functionality later. And that's how the date picker visibility is toggled. Next, I'll temporarily remove the hidden attribute from the date picker. Then in JavaScript, I'll select the dates element. Before we continue with the rest of the code, let's take a closer look at the date object in JavaScript. To initialize a date, you simply use the new date constructor. This is the method to get the full year. And this is the method to get the month. Even though it's February, we get 1 because months in JavaScript are 0-based, ranging from 0 for January to 11 for December. Next, we can get the date like this. Then for the day of the week, we call it like this. Like months, days are also 0-based, starting with 0 for Sunday and ending with 6 for Saturday. To specify a date, parameters are provided to the date constructor for the year, month, and date. If the date is 0, it represents the previous day of the specified month. In this case, it's currently February, so the day before February is January 31st. Now that we have a better understanding of how dates work in JavaScript, let's return to the date picker and continue. Here, I'll declare 3 variables using the let keyword, as I'll need to update their values later on. Next, I'll create a function to display the dates and call it immediately when the page loads. Inside the function, the first thing to do is clear the date's content. Next, I'll add a comment to lay out what needs to be done. I'll work on displaying the current month first, but before that, I'll create a separate function to generate the buttons. Moving on to displaying the current month, the first step is to retrieve the last date of the month. Then, I'll create a loop starting from 1 up to the last date of the month and add a button for each iteration. Next, I'll remove the buttons that were previously added to the HTML. After that, I'll go to the console and check the first date of the month. Here, since the first day of the month is Thursday, I'll need to adjust the code accordingly. This is where the last week of the previous month is relevant. Like in the current month, I'll get the last date of the previous month. Next, I'll create a loop from 0, which is Sunday, up to the last day of the previous month, which is Wednesday. And again, I'll add a button for each iteration. After adding the buttons, I still need to adjust the text. To do that, I'll first get the last date of the previous month. Then reset the day to Sunday by subtracting the day. Finally, I'll use the iteration to incrementally update the texts. The dates are now correctly positioned and labeled. For the last part, I'll get the first date of next month. Of course, the date will be 1, but I need to determine the day of the week. Once the day is known, I'll initiate a loop starting from that day. In this case, since it's Friday, the loop will start at index 5 up to Saturday, which is index 6. But here, I'll use this condition to indicate that we can only loop up to 7 days in a week. Then once again, I'll add a button for each iteration. As for the text, I'll simply copy the text from the previous month and make some adjustments. Here, I noticed that the style for disabled buttons is not applied. So I'll go back to the CSS file and add the missing styles. I'll make the buttons a bit transparent. Then I'll set the pointer events to none so that the hover effect will not be applied. Now, for the current month, I'll add a condition to determine which date should have the today class applied. I'll also add a click event listener to each button to determine the selected date. Now, when I click on a date, the selected class should be applied. That wraps up the functionality to display dynamic dates. Next, I'll focus on implementing the month navigation feature. To start, I'll select the previous and next buttons. Then, I'll add a click event listener to both buttons. For the next button, I'll increment the month by 1 and ensure it loops within 0 to 11. Then update the dates accordingly. Finally, if the current month is December, I will increment the year. The logic for the previous button is similar, with slight modifications. If the month is January, I'll decrease the year. Then, I'll decrease the month, looping back to 11 when 0 is reached. Now to test it, I'll set the month to April. Then I'll retrieve the first and last dates of April. Here, April 1st is Monday, and April 30th is Tuesday, matching the console output. Next, I need to update these inputs dynamically, so I'll make a function for that. Then I will select the month and year input elements. Back to the function, I'll adjust the selected index for the month input because it's a drop-down element. For the year input, I'll modify the value as with any input element. Next, I'll invoke that function within this block to ensure the inputs are synchronized with the rendered dates. Finally, I'll test both inputs if updated correctly. And that's how to handle the previous and next month navigation. Now, when I update the month and year inputs, the dates aren't changing, so I'll implement that feature. First, I'll add a change event listener to the month input. Next, I'll update the month variable with a new value. Then, I'll update the display dates accordingly. Next, I'll add a similar event listener for the year input. Now, I'll test to see if it works. The dates are matched accordingly. That concludes the setup for updating the month and year based on user input. For the last feature, cancel date selection is done. Now, I'll finalize the apply function. Here, I will assign the selected date to the date input. But since the selected date is an object, I'll convert it to a string and format the output. Now, I'll test it thoroughly. So far, it seems to be working correctly. With that, I've completed covering all the features of the date picker. Back to the HTML, I'll remove the year input value. And also set the date picker back to hidden. I thought of some improvement, so I'll go back to the code. Here, I'll switch from document to date picker to restrict the actions within the date picker. Next, I'll move this line inside the create button function. Also, since the selected date dynamically changes, this approach will be incorrect, so I'll fix it. I'll also include adding a selected class to the button in this function. Lastly, I'll update all references to this function throughout the code. I'll test it one more time to see if the changes broke the existing functionality. It appears that everything is functioning correctly. That concludes this tutorial for Custom Date Picker. I hope you found this helpful in understanding how to create dynamic calendars and manipulate dates in JavaScript. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment to support this channel.